Yeah.
As soon as you have it walked away.
Well, so that's.
Thank you for those of you who have braved the weather to come out tonight and be with us. Please do avail yourself of the warm beverages and warm cookies in the back. Please, please. We'll get started. Yeah, give everybody just a second to get settled. If we need some more chairs, we can make that happen. We can pull some of these around. We want this to be like more of a conversational opportunity. So don't be shy. Get on in here with everybody.
We'll make it bigger, sir.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind, spread those chairs out a little bit. So give everybody just a second for that. I'm gonna keep this guy up a little bit. They're doing that. I'm not. How do I do this? I thought this was easy. This is not easy.
You want to move it or?
No, I want to pick it up.
Oh,
Actually, here. All right. This is not, why is this not like the other? There we go. All right. Okay. All right, hopefully that's better. All right, so thanks everybody. Come on and get settled. If you need a refresh during the meeting, feel free to get up and avail yourself of all the goodies in the back. We're really glad you're here despite the weather, and we're anticipating a pretty good on turnout on Zoom as well. A lot of people are really, yeah, let's go. But I still want to see what you have to say. So thank you. I want to thank our guest speaker, Tim, and also it's really nice to have Representative Ma here. Tonight to talk about bikes and transportation and getting out on the river and things that are going to sound so nice until we can actually do them in the spring.
Yeah. Once it's not negative.
It's not -11 today. Don't bring that negativity in here.
It was all 11. That's.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 13.
So, there we go. So, so this is what's on the agenda tonight, starting with the welcome and the snacks, which I think we have covered. I'm also going to talk briefly about a couple of things coming up in the neighborhood in the next couple of weeks, including they finally set a date for the hearing for the Damon silos demolition, and also some new work that we're doing with UIC this term. And then we're going to talk about infrastructure on trails on the river, including our guest speaker, Tim, and then we'll close out with some upcoming events and volunteer opportunities. So, okay. So first off, the Damon silos, you know, this has been going on for some time. Hang on, I'm not trying to broadcast it in the window. This has been going on for some time, but they have finally set a date for the hearing, which is going to determine when. This is about historic preservation. Want to be super clear. There is an environmental review that is involved in this process by Army Corps. So just as a quick recap, you may remember in the fall, there was a huge debacle and we all went to a public meeting for the city demolition permits. And it didn't look good. And then at the last minute, the city recounted and said, actually, we're going to wait for the feds. And so the city has said that they're going to wait for the federal environmental review to happen because they want to include that. And so they're waiting for Army Corps to conclude their process before they issue a city permit. There is also a federal permit. That federal permit has an environmental and a historical aspect to it. There will not be a meeting regarding the environmental aspect at the federal level. There will be this meeting regarding the historical aspect at the federal level. We have submitted a letter, and any member of the community is welcome to submit a letter or to show up to the meeting and say your piece. Our letter basically said, the metal buildings here are in terrible shape. Do what you need to do. We're really interested in the silos themselves, and we think that they should be repurposed. Here are a million ways you could repurpose them. Here are some other things you could do instead of demolishing them. And if you demolish them, these are all the things we want you to do with the leftover pieces, and we want the community to get a community asset out of this space. So that's basically what our letter said. We can make that available to anybody who wants to see the details. But for any of you who have opinions about what should happen to this space, things you would like to see here, preferably things that are realistic given the current owner and realize that's not, what anybody wants to hear, but it is private property and that's sad. Please bring all of those thoughts and opinions to this meeting on February 1st, which is a Thursday night at the Field House at 7. Questions on that? So I think, yeah,
Just to be clear, the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government could still have the power to stop the demolition. based
Yeah.
on either of these criteria, despite the fact that the sale is completed.
that's correct. They can technically stop demolition. It's more likely that they will come to an agreement about how to handle demolition and meet some of the demands of the community in the course of doing so. So, for example, one of the suggestions that was put forth is that there should be any redevelopment of the space will require them to build a riverfront path, and that's part of what we're talking about tonight, so this all ties together. One thing is you should take some of the scraps from the demolition and put public art on that riverfront path. Another one was, hey, you should take the red bricks from that red brick building and build something else in the community out of those materials that the community actually wants. So there's ideas out there of things like that, but that is the most likely path, is that they will look at ways to give the community something, and it may come down anyway. But there's time left. There's time left, and so the more the merrier. Please say your piece. Anything else? We are running 2 classes with USIC. We had a site walk in as the temperature dropped below 0 on Saturday. So really want to thank our graduate students, several of whom are online with us right now, for braving the weather and come out on Saturday. Also, one of the fun things I learned today, did you know that you can buy a CTA sign from CTA? And so I pulled these up on their website and it was like, when we grow up and have office space, I really want it. Anyway, we're gonna be looking at 2 projects in the neighborhood. There's an undergraduate seminar that's working on some basic design community engagement work. And they are gonna be looking at the alley between the 35th and Archer L and the Family Dollar. So the alley that goes right to your office in Briza, how to make that more welcoming. With the idea that we would encourage people to use that as a pedestrian path instead of walking on Archer. So we'll be looking at things like cleanup, greenery, maybe moving some dumpsters, having public art, better lighting, some basic retail stuff. And part of the hope with that is that if we can do that much, we might eventually get CTA to turn over the parking lot right next to it. Which is one of 2 parking lots serving that L station, with the idea that it could become a linear park. So right now, we're not gonna put all that on these undergrads, but we're looking at, how do we kind of set this up for some facts on the ground, provide a better pedestrian experience, and then maybe later we can expand on it. The graduate students are looking at the area around Part 571, Canal Park Origins, and the Ashland L. And the idea there is looking at improving pedestrian infrastructure between parks and transit and just generally around that intersection because it's a hot mess. There's been a lot of study, so they have a lot to work with. There's a CDOT study. You might remember last year, there was a survey where they said, which of these 8 things would you like to see? Would you like to see a bridge over Bubbly Creek? Would you like to see pedestrian islands on Ashland? And of course, we were like, all of them, and you want us to pick 3? So the students will be looking at some things about, with greater specificity, like if we had a bridge over Bubbly Creek, what should it look like and where should it go? So some basic things like that. And that'll be going on, and there'll be several opportunities for all of you to come out and engage with them. Specifically, they're gonna be at, and I'll show this at the end, that group of students is gonna be at Senior Bingo at the Field House next month. They will be out for the Lunar New Year Parade, and also at the Bridgeport Arts Center 3rd Fridays. So you'll notice that not all of those events are in our neighborhood, and that's because this is part of our bicycle project that goes between McKinley Park and Bridgeport and Chinatown. So we're trying to provide opportunities for everybody from all of those neighborhoods to get in on the action. Questions on any of that? Yeah,
I know that the land opposite to the shopping center was sold and it's being developed right now. I'm guessing whoever is developing that would be super interested in developing a connection between the L train.
we, yes, so Castle bought that, Chinese American Service League, and they're gonna be putting in mostly senior housing. So yes, we are absolutely hoping to capitalize on the fact that you have a vulnerable population in a concentrated location to get better pedestrian infrastructure. We have not had a chance to talk with that developer yet, but we'd like to. And it's my understanding that they are also looking at a second crossing on Bubbly Creek, possibly to facilitate so that if you live in Bridgeport, you don't have to walk all the way around the lock to get to the Marianos.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good opportunities for symbiosis here.
And I think they will be having public meetings for input as well and some of the.
Okay, yeah, would you let us know when you hear specifics
Yeah.
about that? 'Cause, yeah, we definitely want to talk to them.
Yeah, they're talking about a performance space and, lots of different community resources as well. So it'll be, some offices as well as senior housing and performance space and another resources.
That's great. Great. So now, as a preface to what Tim is going to talk about, which is mostly work on bikes and pedestrian infrastructure in other parts of the south side. So he's going to talk about Calumet and Lawndale and some other projects around town. And have Eladio come up and talk to you a little bit about our project. And part of what we want to get out of this conversation tonight is to think about how some of the things that are going on in other parts of town could be applied here in the interest of recreation and transportation and just generally getting people out on the river in all kinds of ways. So, Eladio?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Eladio Montenegro. I'm working on the Riverfront project, and so the general gist of it is to extend and create riverwalk paths to connect the existing parks, and then to work with private property owners to kind of talk them into letting us build paths through their property. And so we're in talks with different railroads, different property owners to see what we can do to extend the paths. And so as Kate said, there are riverfront guidelines. So whenever anyone sells property, they have to build a path. But at the end of the project, in the future, ideally someone will be able to get from Western all the way to the Pinkton Park and then someday all the way to downtown without having to get on any of the major streets like Archer, which is not so pedestrian friendly. And so, like we said, there are currently riverfront guidelines. So if the silos get torn down and they build something, they'll have to build a path right to the specificity of a template path, gravel, specific trees and whatnot. And so existing property owners don't have to follow these rules. But as we talk to them and we can get them to build paths, we'll try to build something that mirrors the guidelines as closely as possible. So it feels like one continuous similar path. And I'll turn it on over to our guests, unless anybody has questions about what we've done so far.
Slides while you take questions.
How's it going?
It's going well. So we've done our initial assessment of getting track of everyone who owns property along the riverfront. We know everyone who owns something on there. We've had 2 community feedback events, one at the Riverfront Trail on Halsted, right behind anywhere else, and then one at the holiday market that we have hosted. And those have gone well. We're going to have additional ones. We're in talks with the NSF, Canadian National, ComEd, to try and figure out like what we can do to get them to let us run a path to their property. There's a few railroads, there's a railroad that runs between Dayton and Western that doesn't get used. And it's a long strip of land that like would connect that. And so it's owned by the NSF, so we're talking about them. Same thing with Canadian National, try to figure out how to get people across Halsted. ComEd on the substation right next to the current path. And so talking with everyone to see what they'll agree to do. And then figuring out who's currently selling or planning to sell property Because if it sells and they develop it, then we'll have to get another patent, so.
Yeah.
And make an inventory of everything. But it's going on, people are talking.
Great.
If you need any assistance with any of the, folks connected to the railroad.
Yes,
company, I can,
and IDOT.
I can help with that.
There's a little piece that belongs to IDOT. There's kind of this interesting thing is that a lot of what, because of the way the river gets used, a lot of what we're looking at east of Halsted is gonna be on public property. A lot of what we're looking at, most of everything on west of Halsted is private property. And so what he's talking about with Canadian National, there's this little stretch that's theirs, and then IDOT and CDOT all the way to Canal. And so we're gonna need a little help there.
Okay, yeah,
I'll reach out to them.
okay. Very good.
And I'll turn over.
Yeah.
When the project begins, will these railroad companies basically contribute to the construction as well? Or is that?
That'll be part of the talks that we have. I mean, it'll be up to them. We can't make them do anything. Right now, just asking and saying, hey, there's gonna be paths on either side of you. You're gonna be the thing holding up people, making them go around. And so I'm trying to figure out what kind of agreement we come to.
Yeah, and I figure you're emphasizing public's goodwill.
Absolutely, yeah. Because current property owners don't have to do it, they can just now. But like I said, most of them are speaking to us, they're not outright saying that. But good thing.
Yeah, nobody's refused to talk to us. Some conversations have gone better than others.
Any other questions? All yours?
Right, well, thank you. Thank you to everybody who, thank you, Kate, for inviting me to speak tonight. And thank you all for coming to braving the weather. My name is Tim Gustafson. I am a transportation planner and I work for an engineering firm. And over the course of my career, I've been really fortunate to have the opportunity to work on non-motorized, bicycle and pedestrian specific issues. It's been a lot of fun. And so what Kate has asked me to do tonight is talk a little bit about the work that I do as it relates to trail planning in other parts of the city and use that as a means of conversation starting to help explain what groups like this group can do to help further that and support it. We've got some familiar faces who are familiar with processes like that. So thank you for coming. And I just want to make sure I understand the best way to advance these. I think I'm just going to go the
Might need a
old-fashioned way.
scroll bar.
Scroll bar or just tap in here. Excellent. So I wanted to give you a little bit of context for the work that I have been doing over the course of my career, and then the talk is structured kind of generally around these themes as a means of saying, if you're interested in building that network, what are the steps or what are the ways that we can do that? I want to start first and give you a little bit of context. These are documents that I was not responsible for, was not involved in producing, but they definitely guide a lot of the work that I do. So on the left-hand side, this is actually relatively recent. The Cook County Bike Plan was released in April of last year. This guides a lot of the investment priorities that Cook County specifically is focusing on. And the thing that I find really encouraging about the Cook County Bike Plan is it's multi-jurisdictional and they have the authority to advance projects because they have their own funding source, they have their own roadways and their own rights of way and their own property. So they're able to close gaps that others can't. They also can operate in a cross-jurisdictional manner, which is very hard for the Chicago Department of Transportation or IDOT to do because they're really only allowed to do things that they own. Cook County spreads a little bit thinner and can do a lot more interesting things. And the work that I currently do in an on-call capacity with Cook County is stitching together some of those that I'm going to show you here, like the sticky gaps in your trail network that are part IDOT, part railroad, part park district. Sometimes closing those gaps can be the most impactful. The image in the center is the city of Chicago's Trails and Corridors vision. So how they want to see the trail network built out within the city. You can see we're sorely lacking in the near southwest side, which is unfortunate. So hopefully this can further the conversation about how do we get some additional red and blue lines in that area. This also helps them to pursue federal grant opportunities and seek funding where they need assistance. Because as we all know, quality infrastructure is worth the price, but it's also not cheap. And then on the right, Chicago Cycling Strategy. This was probably the most exciting part, and many of you might be familiar, is that the city is committed that if we have a good quality bike network, we should invest in making it a separated and more protected bike network. So we're starting to see more curbs and traffic signals and traffic calming and ways to make it so that those of us who are not the enthused and confident cyclists might actually feel comfortable on a city street. The City of Chicago Bikeways Program is an ongoing program, and this is their page. So if you ever want to look at ongoing projects, you can see what they're working on. And this is where they kind of recount some of their wins and champion things that they've done over the years. Upgrading their network is something that I've had the fortune of being part of as a consultant working for the city in project management for design of projects, upgrading those bike lanes, stitching together some of those connections. And sometimes the low stress facilities are really where the wins are going to be found. These documents are projects that I have been involved in, and some of them are actually still ongoing. So you're going to get a sneak preview, which is really just a slide cover for a presentation I'm giving next week. But from left to right, the Riverdale Community Area Transportation Plan. Riverdale is the southwestern and mostly southernmost community area of the city of Chicago. It's bounded by 138th Street to the south, so that gives you an idea how far south we are, and pretty far west. It's west of Lake Calumet, it's west of the Bishop Ford. It's one of the community areas that has the least number of high quality and protected bicycle facilities of any community area in the entire city. Next to it is Lake Calumet Trail Feasibility Study. I'm going to talk about that one in a little bit more detail because that's the next step in a process. So once you have a vision, people start asking, well, what's it going to look like? Where's it going to go? And how's this going to work? These are the types of studies that really help to move the needle on making the project become closer to reality, because someone has to think through, like, how do you get that railroad crossing? What's the best intersection to cross that? Or what street needs to be made calmer for this to be something that's actually connected? Just east of that was a follow-on project called the Big Marsh East Side Neighborhood Connectivity Plan. This was actually funded by Cook County to help stitch together a more low-stress network to get people to Big Marsh Park from the east side of Big Marsh. As if you've ever been, it's a great biking facility. You can only get there by way of Stony Island today, and it's over 1.5 miles from the nearest high-quality facility, but there are buffer bike lanes on Stony. We're recommending ways to upgrade those as well. And then stitching this all together, as I mentioned, the first follow-on task order from the adoption of the bike plan at the county level is the Lake Calumet Bike Network Study, which takes some recommendations from each of those previous three and puts it together in a more cohesive strategy so that Cook County can say, here's how we are hoping to help. Sometimes putting together those networks consists of a lot of combinations of low-stress facilities. So I wanted to show this. When I was project manager for design of the Streets for Cycling program, there was a connection where we needed to get people from Calumet Park to the Burnham Greenway by way of Ewing Avenue, and you had to go under the Bishop Ford and the Skyway, or you had to go into the Skyway to get there. You also had to cross through a difficult intersection under the jurisdiction of IDOT, Indianapolis Boulevard. So the city actually came up with a clever way of getting the bike lanes on 100th Street to a jug handle. That's what this is called. So you could cross at the crossing, a sidewalk connection underneath the railroad and Skyway Bridge to get you to the Burnham Greenway. So sometimes it's not one single facility, but a series of small, tiny changes that can have a huge impact, because image number 2 makes it clear that you are allowed to bike on this stretch of sidewalk because it's the only low stress way we can get you there in the short term. So legitimizing some of those defensive behaviors can go a long way to making bicyclists feel welcome. And sometimes it's those little breadcrumbs that make this ride to 3 Floyd Brewing or something similar a little bit more easy.
Can you take a sec to explain low stress versus?
Sure. When we look at roadways in their current condition, there is a way of rating them from the perspective of how comfortable someone feels biking along it. It's a concept known as level of traffic stress, and it's a function of how much space do you have, how fast and how much of the traffic is whizzing by you. And it really can make a difference between whether or not you would feel comfortable biking out there with me and my nephews, or if you need to grip the handle really tight and take your life in your hands. The lower the stress, the more inclusive the network. So if we try to reduce the traffic stress, we can do things like separating ourselves from automobile traffic, providing a separate facility, or sometimes just calming the traffic and slowing speed. So image number 1 is a good example of a calm roadway environment where there's a little bit of extra space carved out for us when we're bicycling. Space number 2 is a way of getting us off of the roadway and giving us that better facility. And then image 3 is the ideal is a trail that's completely separated from automobile traffic. Great question. Another version could be just using the city's program to help get us to the networks that we really enjoy. So on the southeast side, not too far from what I just showed you, down on 112th Street, there was a resurfacing program and we designed the bike lanes to go in on 112th Street because that would help to connect to two of the trails and get you to the state of Indiana. I don't know how many people go to the Walmart, but there's also a lot of people that go to the casino. But that being said, this area of the southeast side wanted to get a road diet, which is a way of changing a roadway that's got 4 lanes, turning it into a roadway that's got 3 lanes. And with the space left over, we can create space for bicycling. So this is showing the resurfacing project that was in effect in 2021. You can see that they were putting in the median refuge islands. These are not at the exact same places in the project, but this shows you what it looks like as of December or November of last year when we were out there for the bike network study. Suddenly you can bike all the way east and west. This goes as far west as Avenue O. We actually took it to Green Bay Avenue, but it effectively begins at Avenue O. There are plans to improve Avenue O in the future, which will start to stitch this together. So it all starts coming together when you can invest in these types of facilities. And I think the strength in this is if you're advocating for a continuous trail, start building the case and find ways that you can get more people to that trail. I like to think of a trail as a spine, and all of these connecting areas are kind of the things leading to that spine. So the spine becomes a lot more powerful if more people can access it. 130th Street, which is the southernmost truck route and last interchange in the city of Chicago on the Bishop Ford, has been advocating for the addition of a side path, which is a separated bicycling and walking facility separate from the roadway. Since before I even got involved in the Riverdale Community Area Transportation Plan in 2018. Very connected and well-versed advocates down there have been advocating for this. This image of the Rosebud Farm Stand is a now closed grocery store. This area is in a food desert. People that live down here on 130th Street have one CTA bus route that gets them up to the Pullman neighborhood. And if they can't get on the bus because it's too full, most of them walk the 2 1/4 miles to the Walmart for groceries. So this was a way of saying we need better walking and bicycling facilities because for some of the people living here, it's an economic hardship area. This is the only way they can get to that Pullman Walmart. They have to walk west and then north. And it's a long trek. I can't even imagine doing it on a day basis. So this is now moving forward. The good news is the CDOT has finally taken this project up. This is an interesting one where this road is under the jurisdiction of the state of Illinois, but the city of Chicago was tired of waiting for them to make it a priority and said, we will advance the project. We need to find some funding, but we're ready to move forward. We'd like to make this happen. The city is also committing to closing these gaps, especially in areas that are underserved or don't have low stress facilities. Because if you've ever been on this stretch of 130th Street, it's 4 lanes of travel. It's effectively 7 lanes wide with the medians and turn lanes. It's posted at 40, but I think you can easily break 65 if you're trying to. And some people don't even realize they're doing that. So this is an attempt to give people that low stress facility because there's no way we can contain the roadway that's currently shown. But some of the more exciting things is connecting things on the far southeast side. So this is an overview. This is an image prepared by the Active Transportation Alliance, who is actually a partner and partial funding supporter for this study, which was funded through IDNR funds. Coastal, forget the name.
Coastal Management Program?
That's the one. So this was a really good way to help further this vision, saying, okay, we have one of the largest natural areas on the southeast side, high quality facility. It's an independent municipal corporation that has land use jurisdiction on everything around it, but they also wanted to see this become part of the regional trail network. Active Trans had been advocating for a connected trail vision. This study took it to the next level and basically walked through the steps of going, where would it go? What would it connect to? And what would it look like? So this is a slightly more zoomed in image of the preferred trail alignment that shows the Bishop Ford over here at 115th Street, connecting across into the Pullman neighborhood. CDOT is working on improvements to 115th, 111th, and Cottage Grove Avenue. So these will all stitch together. But then the Illinois International Port District, on which all of these lines are drawn, they said, where would we put it through our property? And they were actually the ones advocating for this. So we didn't have to sell them on it. They were already saying, we're going to find the funds for this. We're going to get this project going. The executive director at the time was very much in support of this because it supported the larger Port District master plan to diversify and expand the mix of uses on the port property to really draw in that investment. they saw that trails were definitely a component of that. And when you're an independent municipal corporation and you have full land use jurisdiction on all of this acreage, and you see it as a way of increasing your lease agreement values, they were motivated to do this. So we, at the time, spent some time figuring out where would it go? How could we thread the trail through wetlands, golf courses, lakefront areas, natural habitat, and still make it a high quality facility while also maximizing the property that they wanted to keep open for future development, and that this would be compatible with it. So this is a combination of trail on, just good old fashioned trail on earth, trail on structure or a bridge, and then in some areas, even the ability to say, maybe we build something that's similar to the Chicago Park District boat dock system. So they've got some floating external areas that can actually be quite sizable, and you can drive an emergency vehicle. So boardwalks are not the flimsy thing that you think of when you hear boardwalk. These are more substantial structures that can go in areas that are environmentally sensitive, not impact floodway and floodplain, and minimize wetland impacts. The exciting thing is when you get to work on studies like this, you also have access to a team of people who can render and say, well, what would it look like when we build it? That is a huge win, and I think it's really important. This shows what the trail would do as it crosses Stony Island Avenue. Sometimes the best way to deal with the railroad is to say, we're just gonna go over. It's much easier to get an overpass than it is to get an at-grade crossing or an underpass. You don't have to deal with drainage, security, lighting, all of those things, but you need to go pretty high up in the air. So this trail begins to rise from pretty far back to meet the clearance to get over Stony Island. And the good news is it would land right in Big Marsh Park, so you're not having to then navigate another intersection. And the Park District in Big Marsh were supporters of this and members of the steering committee. So when you're thinking about who might be involved, start thinking about who owns the property that you want to have access to. Do they benefit in some way, or can you structure this so that it is a mutually beneficial or a community goodwill building effort? But once you also start sharing the vision, people start asking, how much is this going to cost? I think it's always important to think of these items that I was alluding to. Who owns the land? Who's in the business of actually owning a trail? So sometimes you're asking someone to be the owner of a trail and they've never done so. They have no concept of what kind of immunity or liability insurance they would need for someone that has a slip and fall or gets injured on the trail. So finding entities that are familiar with that is also a component of getting buy-in on a trail network. You also want to know who maintains them. A good anecdote that we learned in this process is the Chicago Park District, big supporter of trails. Chicago Park District does not have structural engineers to investigate, inspect, and maintain bridges. They would rather the city of Chicago take that on. So if you have a structure, the Park District may not be the best one to take that on. So this requires a lot of kind of formalized coordination so that the people who have the expertise, the funding, and the jurisdiction to do the thing that you want are in the conversation, right in the room. There's going to be a lot more investigation that goes into making this trail a reality. So the study outlines the kinds of investigations that you'll need to take on. Kate alluded to historic and environmental concerns. There's also groundwater, contaminated soil, special waste, soil structure. A lot of those things come into play later on, but this helps to set the stage so that the city, the Port District, and any stakeholder and consultant knows what they're getting themselves into. Not that it's the prime focus of this slide, but it's an $18 million structure all in with the trail. Not unrealistic, but this is also important to break down what the costs cover, where you'll have to be prepared to find the funding, and how you can break down in phases. So you're not just asking for $18 million all at once, you're asking for $850,000 to do the preliminary engineering and use that as a way to make your case and build your funding candidate. The next project is just east of that, Big Marsh. It's similar, but this one was focused more on stitching together ways to get to Big Marsh from the other side of the park. So this is the Stony Island entrance today, and the goal was, can we get an entrance over here on 116th Street? This was an attempt to find other ways to make sure that if we can get people to 116th Street, then how do they get to there from the low stress facility and from there and beyond? So we did a lot of research as to who lives within a reasonable distance and what roadways or bike facilities do they have access to today? And if they don't have them, where can we recommend and find ways to create? The image on the lower left is 122nd Street, which is your next possible street to the south of here. And as you can see, the current condition is not necessarily bike friendly, and there's not a lot of room to make space. because you've got truck traffic in both directions and wetlands on both sides. So it's not your best candidate, but 116th Street probably better suited. Obviously, the follow-on from Lake Cal into this study was, let's make sure that we're being consistent between plans and we're not creating a contradiction or a conflict. And the goals of this project were to connect these facilities to each other and confirm who has jurisdiction. So I've been alluding to sometimes the state has jurisdiction of the roadway, sometimes the city has jurisdiction of the roadway. Interestingly enough, 116th Street is not actually a street anymore. It's an almost vacated right-of-way that's fully owned by the Chicago Park District that then intersects with Torrance Avenue, which is under the jurisdiction of the state of Illinois. And the 3 houses that live at that intersection are still on septic tanks. Give you an idea of how old this area is in terms of development. The other thing that we look at is once we say, you know, it'd be great if we had something on Torrance, we need to make sure that that recommendation is feasible. Otherwise, the state of Illinois would be like, we can't make that work. We need all of this space for the traffic that's currently there. We don't have access to additional right-of-way. And as I mentioned before, almost everything down here is either a Superfund contaminated site or a wetland. Almost no in between. And then always coming up with what is it going to be the cost to build it, and then what is the cost to maintain it. A good case in point is if you ever have biked on Stony Island, there's bike lanes out there, but it's not in the street and sands program for street sweeping on a regular basis. So even though you can get there, there's glass and debris on the bike. So their recommendation is if and when you upgrade it, please start sweeping it. You know, some things as simple as that. The 116th Street vision is pretty straightforward. It's not going to be a very busy or trafficked street. This was like one of the preliminary ideas is let's just make a shared street out of it. It's going to be very low speed, very low volume, pretty low stress. So maybe we can just do a shoulder and maybe some shared travel lanes. It's going to behave more like a park entrance drive than a street because it terminates, you know, just a few hundred feet to the west where the bridge over the railroad tracks would begin to get into the big park. When we talked with Cook County, the park district, they said, you know, if this starts to come together, maybe we start to use this as our main entrance to Indian Ridge Marsh, which is the other major land holding out that way. So they started to build their own case for saying, we wouldn't invest in paving a street that just leads to somebody else's park. But if we kind of make this part of a larger system, then we can make a stronger case. And then getting people from there from farther away, if you're familiar with 103rd Street, this is an intersection where 103rd Street, Doty, Stony, all become part of this big spaghetti bowl of interchange nonsense. And we said, well, that's not low stress either. So how do we get people from the CTA 103rd Street terminal across 103rd Street onto Doty Avenue, which is heavily trafficked with trucks, give them their own space. And then those bike lanes on Stony, rather than one buffered lane in each direction, let's put both of the bike lanes on one side, add some protection, and finally create a facility that you would feel comfortable biking to Big Marsh Park with your family.
Can you take a second with these to explain right away?
Sure.
Because for some of our neighbors, these are going to be like some new terms.
Yeah. So what you see in these images is we show you how wide the road is from edge of pavement to edge of pavement. That's the available width that we know the road is today. It's also important to know how much property does the city or the state have beyond that. That's referred to as the right of way. Generally, we can make things work for a lot less cost and headache if you can fit it within the existing roadway. But if you need additional space, it's important to know how much space you have within the right of way. And this is reserved all the time for utilities, drainage, any widening that may happen in the future. More often than not, especially in some of these areas, the roadway and the right of way are very close to each other because there's not a lot of room left, which makes it challenging. But in some areas down here, it's actually quite wide. So in some of those cases, we can reconfigure or repurpose how the roadway is set up to make that space. I would say the majority of a lot of the urban bike design we do is trying to create mere inches or feet from an otherwise wide roadway. Or as I showed you on 112th Street, instead of 4 lanes, can we get by with 1 in each direction and a center left turn lane? Suddenly we have 10 to 14 extra feet to work with. This makes it a lot easier to make room for those facilities. So that's a good primer, I'd say, on like what does roadway width versus right of way width mean. And then if we want to get really wonky, we can talk about edge of pavement to face of curb. And sometimes we're working with mere inches to try and create enough space. And then as I alluded to, some of this work is being memorialized in the Lake Calumet Bike Network study, taking all those recommendations, validating them, putting a little bit more scope behind them for saying, okay, this is a roadway that's going to be resurfaced 5 years from now, so the best way to do this is wait for the resurfacing, design that to be included at the time. Now we're not adding a whole lot of cost to the project. I think Cottage Grove is a good example. The city's working on design right now to upgrade that from buffered bike lane in each direction to a separated bike lane. So they're going to do it with the next resurfacing, and then they can add their precast curbs and they don't have to worry about changing the drainage situation. Other projects are going to take a while. So a bridge over the Norfolk Southern Railroad, we met with them very early to say this is an interest, but until there really gets momentum, Norfolk Southern doesn't really need to be involved until we start asking them for their project development process. What are their height clearance requirements, which we already researched. And then we would eventually have to go to them for an access agreement because we're crossing over their air rights. So don't tackle everything all at once, but these projects will be going before the Lake Calumet Bike Network Steering Committee next Tuesday night on the 22nd. It'll be our fourth and final steering committee meeting, and then we'll wrap this up probably by March or April, and then it'll be available for public consumption. But if I can't find it right now tonight, the Lake Calumet Bike Network Study current state of biking report is available on the project webpage, so I can always provide that as a follow-up for anybody who wants to review everything that's in there so far, and then we'll be amending it with the recommended projects, like I said, in about a month or two. The Lake Cal Bike Network Study map looks very similar to what you've seen before. I would say the biggest takeaway from the work that I've been doing since Riverdale through the current day is these recommendations predate me. So this isn't a vision that I or my team came up with. Our role was, let's articulate that vision, let's reify it by figuring out how it's going to work. And then we'll figure out what is the best method for making sure it can be constructed. And then based on who's going to own and maintain it, where can we help them find the money that it's going to take to design and then build it. The design is not the most taxing portion of it. It's usually the capital cost of construction. And then the one that has no federal support anywhere is usually the maintenance. So the sweeping and the plowing, those types of things. So if you want to build it, we need to figure out how that's going to come together. And that's usually a question that doesn't get asked until a little too late in the process. And then suddenly people get very wary. So I think when you learn that you need to make sure that it's in the sweeping program for the city, they can start to anticipate that they're going to have some additional labor hours every year to send a truck down to make sure it's kept clean. I wanted to put this image in here as a nod to the work that Eladio mentioned earlier. So prior to joining HNTV, this was a privately funded pie in the sky daydream of a vision. And it was Active Trans connected us with the funder who said, I want to come up with an idea for how we make this connection work. And this was the first time we started talking about, can we do a boardwalk style of a trail as long as we're outside the navigable channel of the federal project for a federal controlled waterway, because the Army Corps and the US Coast Guard and everybody involved has very clear requirements that they need to keep this open for commerce and shipping and navigation. So we can't impinge on that, but if there's any space left over or being creative and working with property owners adjacent to it, can we split the difference and maybe get a little of their shoreline and a little bit of the non-navigable portion of the channel and still keep it wide enough for 2 barges to pass each other plus some extra breathing room. I think that's the biggest takeaway. So I love sharing the images because it gets people excited and then they start asking those questions like, how's this going to work? Where is it going to go? Who's going to own it? Who's going to maintain it? How much will it cost? Those are the questions that I like finding answers to because I think they can be overwhelming for people that don't do it. But the big takeaway that I wanted to share was the dreamers and the doers and the champions. I think all of us are a little bit of all three. So I think having that dream and having that vision is definitely where you start. And a connected riverfront trail vision is something predates my involvement on any of these trails. But there's a lot of things that can be done. So if you have access to business relationships or parcel information or documentation that someone's hoping or interested in selling or might want to redevelop in a very community-friendly manner, consolidating that, putting that somewhere where you can reproduce it. And then as I like to show with a lot of the maps, showing people where in the city are you talking about. This is something that we also do for Cook County. They lobby in Washington every year. They said, can you help put our projects on a map so that we can take it with us and then tell people we're looking for funding for this. And oh, by the way, here's where Cook County is. That's even important to do when you're far from home. So those things are very helpful. And I think any conversations we have, any discussions like this can make you a fellow champion for these types of things. So if you like to sketch or doodle, or you just want to draw lines on a map, that can be part of the conversation too. So any information you can gather, document and concentrate in one place comes in handy for people that want to make sure that they're up to speed on everything that you're working on. And so I'm going to stop there and see if there's any other questions you have. I definitely appreciate you giving me some of your time and attention tonight, because this stuff is very exciting. And these pictures look a lot warmer and nicer than the weather. So,
Yay. Questions for Tim?
Would you say this all takes a long time?
Dolores Lucas is an advocate who lives in the Elkdale Gardens neighborhood in the Riverdale community area, and she's been asking for a trail since probably before I was born. The good news is I'd say it kicked into earnest gear probably sometime around 2015, 2016, when they asked for local technical assistance funding from our MPO to fund that first transportation plan that recommended it and formalized it. It's been about 2 years kicking around the city going, should we take on a project that's not actually on our right of way? And eventually some policy changes really pushed the needle, and we got some elected officials that made it a priority. And then I think that's really when it took off. So from 2016 to 2023 is a 7-year window to get it into preliminary engineering. I would say that takes a while, but I was encouraged that it's finally moving forward. I think other projects have taken longer. Before getting involved in stuff on the far south side, I was involved in the Skokie Valley Trail on the far north side and in Cook County suburbs. And Representative Elaine Necritz was pushing that one since I was probably a teenager. So 20 years is the very conservative estimate. 7 is ambitious. If you can build the stuff that the city does in one capital program year to connect it, those are the things that build that momentum and excitement. So I know that's a really broad timing that I just gave you, but I would say the connected riverfront trail that's happening here on the near southwest side is relatively young, but it's got some teeth behind it because the city of Chicago's riverfront development guidelines. If you wait long enough, you'll eventually get it, just because property is going to change hands. So you can get a lot of momentum because now you have some policy to support you.
Well, that's an interesting point that you made, because on the one hand, that is a lot of exactly what we're doing here. Is we're definitely, trying to get in front of land turning over on our riverfront,
right,
and anticipating who will be subject to those guidelines and when. However, the thing that we have is, because our riverfront is not continuous, because of our industrial history, we have all these slips.
Right.
If every landowner just did what the city will make them do, none of those trails will be connected.
Right, it's the larger.
And so
efforts
it's
of
the
people.
larger peak. You can do exactly what they need to do on our property, and you won't be able to get from one to the other.
And I think that connected network, so if you have to wait 10, 20 years for a property to turn over, or to turn over at a scale that compels the developer to do what the city's policy says, having those alternative as low stress as you can make them networks, they're not going to be the most continuous, but they'll get you there in the near term. So the city is continuing to invest in, let's make Western or California less awful than it is today. It's not going to be what we ultimately want, but as we were talking when we were like daydreaming how this conversation should be structured, when you're asked to pick, do you want this or this? You're like, well, we deserve both, and we're going to continue to advocate for both. And I think that that's something that you've already kind of shared with the group is they asked us to prioritize, and we said they're all priorities, but here's the order in which we'd like to see them pursue. So don't settle for what the conversation has been structured to tell you you're gonna get. Say, well, we still want all of it. Like, we're gonna get the 130th Street side path, but they still want to calm traffic on that street because it's wider than it needs to be. Or in urban areas, do we really need a cloverleaf interchange? Can't we get something that's a little bit more urban and compact so you can cross it in one traffic cycle instead of dashing and hoping that you make it?
And I think it helps also to have coordination between the city and the state. And so I think that what you have going for you now in this period of time is that, you have a state representative who's willing to be a champion. I work well with the 11th and 12th board, other people, and then also the state senator is also, very much willing to be supportive. And, there's the potential of, making sure that we secure some money at the state level, for various things, and, I pushed for more, budget resources for bike and pedestrian infrastructure already, and
Yeah, and I think that's a very important part of it. So elected leadership also sending that message saying, we're going to put some effort and some resources behind this vision. That's when it really comes into sharper focus, which I think is very exciting. The Illinois International Port District pursued that as well. So they finally have funding secured so they can begin their engineering of the design, which is the next big step, which I think is very exciting. There's a hand up over here and then
I was just gonna ask if this is, so is there room for two barges to cross the pass?
we measured it and we say yes. It's the Army Corps' ultimate decision on whether or not we drew the lines in the correct area where the survey had been drawn. So, yeah, the answer in this stretch is this is about as tight as we can go. If you are familiar with the downtown riverfront, where there's a lot of barge traffic, you'll know that the protection is far more robust than this image shows. So again, this is the vision for what would be great. But I think if this were to move forward and apply for that regional permit between the Army Corps, the city of Chicago, Coast Guard, they'd probably ask for something far more protective and robust, because if you know the momentum on the barge, it would obliterate this dock if it ever ran astray. So the damage it can do to a resource, I think, is, we also want to protect the investment and the users that are enjoying it. So it's important to say, this is not final conversation. This is just a start of that.
It's beautiful though. It's great.
It gets people excited to talk. So that's really what I like to do is I'm going to show you the image of the vision and then people start to go, is that going to work? And then how would it work?
Yeah, so speaking of long timelines, I have vague memories. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but I think it was Governor Quinn proposing like a lengthy riverfront trail that would extend existing I&M canal trails around Joliet all the way downtown. And I'm not sure, I mean, that hasn't happened yet, probably. But I don't know if that was a realistic proposal or a sort of wouldn't it be nice thing, but it seemed to have some details I remember. So I don't know if that would have ever is connected to this at all. And the second thing is, so I remember hearing about that and thinking, well, for the southwest side of the city in particular, like one of the real challenges I think is entry points, because we have a lot of bridges that bridge the canal, and I-55, Damon and Pulaski by where I live are particular ones, but even where it goes underneath, it can be tricky. So like, even if we had a riverfront trail that went, all the way from Joliet to downtown Chicago, that would be great. But I think for a lot of people who live nearby, especially in the city, being able to access that trail in a real effective way would be crucial. And major streets are really the only access points for a lot of places, and a lot of them are essentially highways. So I just didn't know if you had thoughts on either of that.
Yeah, it is exciting. I think you are correct. It was Governor Quinn who unveiled the vision. Obviously, didn't have all the details for how you're going to get under and over all of those things. Summit and Lamont are working on pieces of their share of the I&M, and they're working with the Forest Preserve District, and there's even some land swapping going. We'll trade you this land, it's higher quality in exchange for being able to develop over here. Generally, I would say forest preserves are supportive of trail connectivity as long as it supports their mission of keeping preserves accessible and high quality. Otherwise, they become municipal or park district projects and initiatives. Then the topic of lower resource communities that don't have the ability to advance this vision, places like Stickney, are a little bit more hamstrung for how do we get under and over all of these IDOT roadways? Can we get IDOT's help with it? Or is there even room? So I think that is still a long-term vision. I know that different municipalities are chipping away at it. Will County's even involved in a piece way out. But that's a long stretch. I think that's part of the reason. Stitching these together has been the bulk of the most exciting portion of my 18+ year career. And just untangling 2 or 3 bridges has taken a third of that. So we've got 60 more bridges to go. So I need people like Sid and others to help keep the conversation going because there's a lot to do. And I think those are really exciting. But I don't have any good answers for how to get under and over some of those really tall or really wide, complicated intersections because it gets very urban very fast and we run out of room to do renderings near open space that look like this. And even getting under that lift bridge to get into Pington Park, that'd be its own city project that would take 3 to 8 years just by itself.
We've poked that a little bit,
Mhm.
and so the first thing is that in this image, which is lovely, the bridge is up.
Yeah.
That bridge is never up.
And that
Because it
sailboat
gets
can't
used.
get, that sailboat can't get under it in its current configuration. So the current thinking is, would be more effective to go around the side.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
How are we doing on time? I just want to.
We, the library will start making motions in about 10 or 15 minutes, but let's just go till they.
Yeah,
tell us to pack
A lot of the projects that you showed were incredibly complicated and a whole lot of different kind of spaces that are really cramped in a lot of ways. What can you speak a little bit more to, because, you know, this obviously is very compelling to us because it's here.
Right.
And it's also in front of us. And
You
it's
can
pretty big.
visualize it, yeah.
And it's cold now. And this is very nice.
It's very nice.
Go hang out at the same time. But can you speak to, because, you know, what we're, you know, the ideas that are going, there's a lot of room down here. Yeah, like, and as you said, it is inevitable at someday that land will change hands. So we have, you know, we have momentum, we have legislation, we have some money already, you know, so there's not only teeth, but momentum going on in space to do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're, I don't want to think about 20 years, right? You know, like,
in 2024, yeah.
right, well, I mean, like, but I also understand that
Growth
like part of
Avenue.
it's gonna be, once you get certain pieces in, then it would be like connecting, but can
Yeah.
you speak to like, what do you see as, you know, other than maybe that bridge, which is, what are some major, you know, like, what are some sore spots that you found that could speak to, you know, or maybe some bright spots that are like,
Sure.
hey, this was really easy, this should be, you know,
Yeah.
something that could give us a little.
Yeah, so I wanted to pull this slide up because I think this encapsulates how some of those less exciting, less sexy, and not nearly as well rendered projects can really make a difference because getting to the Burnham Greenway, so the Greenway's already there. It's not as spectacular because it's not new and shiny and it kind of is in a underbridge area, but a lot of people use that to go north and south on the east side. But getting to it was the challenge. So the images seen here, as you can see, just a little bit of concrete work in image 1 where they recast a curve as part of the city's on-call engineering program. The green pavement markings plus the sidewalk pavement markings, that entire project was less than $150,000. And then adding the signs so that people knew that the Burnham Greenway and Calumet Park were less than a mile from where you were. We also added contraflow bike lanes to Avenue L and 98th Street, so you can get back and forth to Ewing Avenue's bike lanes without having to go through this gnarly intersection that's like the 5-way intersection at 100th Street. So sometimes finding those pieces can unlock the second question that you were asking is saying, some of the bright spots we got, especially out of the Big Marsh East Side study, and I didn't touch on this, is one of the things we needed to do is we needed to document how many people live within our study area and how many of them currently enjoy access to a low stress facility within less than a half mile from their home. Then we looked at the demographics of those people and compared them to those having access at the city level on average and found a big equity gap. So for Black and brown communities with lower resources, lower access to vehicles and longer commutes, they had lower access to low stress bike facilities. And we finally were able to put a number to that and use that as a way of telling the city, you can make this a priority. And by investing in this program and this network, you can bring an extra 65,000 people within a half mile of a low stress facility, severely closing that disparity between access and ability for lower stress transportation. So in this neighborhood, if you can document who currently enjoys access to a low stress facility and how many more people would become within that threshold, that's an exercise you can do with access as a mapping software and the US Census data. And it is very impactful. And we're doing the same thing for Lake Calumet. By identifying that, we're able to really make the case that the city of Chicago's investments and Cook County's investments can start to close that gap. And a more continuous network is also higher quality. So it just really starts to get that momentum going. And suddenly $120,000 of pavement marking and curb work done in an on-call contract that the city was gonna spend anyway, becomes a drop in the bucket. And now, I forget what the number was for this one, but that many more people became located within access of a facility where they could cross on foot or by bike, which was really compelling.
Right, because the majority of that, the funding for that, like, that was a big number.
Mhm.
But a lot of that was because like, giant bridges.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of these paths, they cost very little to just put some, comparatively.
Yeah.
Like, a few $100,000 and.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, we were talking with the city about a project and estimating the cost of a streetscape project, and the foundation that is willing to fund it is saying, well, that's less than the cost of rehabilitating two of the homes that we were gonna redo in our neighborhood anyway. So they started to think about it in terms of relative cost, and that builds the momentum. And way back at the beginning of the slide deck, you saw the city's citywide trail vision, the red and blue lines. That they wanted to make sure that they had on the books so that they could also have access to some of the federal funding opportunities that were being advertised that year. And they are able to use that to make the case for how many additional jobs can be reached, how many additional people have access to a low stress facility. And those are the metrics that really get federal attention to say, this is now a project worth investing in. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that you can document that
Putting all those
really strong case.
With all that in mind, and going back to that map of the trail system, something a little bit less complicated. Well, I'm really glad we're working on the riverfront connectivity. We've got 35th Street and Pershing and obviously Archer are like ways to get people closer to downtown and the lake faster. And the streets are already there. We've had so many meetings over the past 2 or 3 years where people are just consistently expressing the desire to see this. I'm wondering if, you're talking a lot about momentum. And I'm thinking about what can we do? We've got 20 people in the room right now. We're focused on McKinley Park. If we started with 35th Street in our neighborhood, sort of with a goal of going from, how far west does 35th Street go? To wherever it hits 55, as far east as we can go, and just making that more bike friendly. Is that something that is a little more achievable in a shorter term? And considering who's in the room right now, like what would it take to get this, to start that one?
So we've had two issues with that. So 35th is a great example. So they did recently get some new paint and some paint and bollards, not totally protected by lines, but at least like the plastic ones by the stocks. That's great. Where's ours?
Yeah.
Right? Because we've been saying like we need a protected lane on Bike Street on 35th. We don't have anything east-west. We have 16,000 people in McKinley Park, and we have two blocks of protected bike lanes on Pershing that just went in this summer. And we were like, well, thanks, but that's not really what we needed.
And Kate's got a lot of access to the metrics that we've been talking about, like having to make that case.
Yeah. And we just keep, and CDOT keeps saying, well, everything you want is on IDOT territory. Okay, fine. So where's IDOT?
And I think you're starting to be more involved in those conversations, which I think is encouraging. I think what you were saying is also really exciting because right now the city is embarking on a major vision and transformation for Ogden Avenue, which is alarmingly similar in its land use makeup, roadway configuration, agency having jurisdiction, crashes and speeding issues. And they're actually thinking big and trying to be very bold about a protected facility of some kind along Ogden. And if they can reach consensus on how that might look there, you can make a much stronger case for Archer is just as good of a candidate moving forward. So I'd say in the near term, if 35th Street is the preferred and getting conversations with CDOT going, okay, maybe 35th Street is too complicated because it's got transit and commercial. Can we do like a 33rd or the next street above and below that are almost as good and just as direct and maybe still under the jurisdiction of the city and less busy, more residential? We spent a lot of time in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood going, let's do everything but Grand and Fullert. Let's do every other neighborhood street that we can get our hands on. And then when we come back and say, well, we need to do something to Grand because everything ties into it, we've made that stronger case. So if Levitt is a good one and Wood is not, those are the streets that you'll want to start growing about and start putting together that kind of argument and finding a way to cross to the signal that's already there.
That's the hard part is because 35th You have to be on Archer, 35th or Pershing to leave the
leave the
neighborhood.
neighborhood.
Therefore, we really do need our routes to be there.
Right.
Because McKinley Park isn't that big.
Yeah, and then the other option is stay on the local street until you need to get to that intersection and then duck on Archer and 35th and improve just the crossing and then dip back into a lane.
I can say that 35th Street by Sox was my project actually.
Yeah.
And the reason that it was easy to do was there's no parking over there. Like, no, like that whole stretch is no parking, and so it was very easy to take curbside space. And I know that another one that is on the books is between Ashland and Racine. Because again, there's no parking over there, so it's much easier to just.
And I bike those pieces and they're much more comfortable than the prior condition.
Yeah. you
Oh,
do-
yeah.
do
It's
really-
nice. I liked it.
No, it is cool, and I'm glad that we have it over there. But rest of the 35th Street, I think there's just enough space for a parked car and a travel lane. So for any sort of protection, I know you heard this already, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some sort of like give and take required.
The city's definitely pivoted away from putting everything on the arterials and going, maybe there's some things that can go through the neighborhood. Obviously CTA bus routes are not one of them that are a total win, but in my neighborhood, Rogers Park, there is a Lund bus that goes through on a residential street because Toohey's too far away and Howard is too far away. So they found compromises for transit. We can find compromises for walking and biking too. And they have more momentum because.
Since pointing to one of the other interesting things too, is I think to get our bike lanes, we're gonna have to convince the powers that be to centralize parking.
I'm getting the
Yep.
time's almost up, so we'll do.
Probably last question.
Well, the one thing I was gonna say is that when we were having the meetings for the dispensary. One of the conversations was like that between Archer and or Ashland and
That's Ashland 35th.
well, the Ashland 35th all the way to I guess the Bridgeport Arts Center is huge. Enormous, nothing, plenty of space, and like this would, and if we keep building pieces, like you've got a piece there, and then you find, and like, once you get past Sox, there's plenty of wonderful bike lanes, all the way to the lakefront. If you start building pieces of it, then if you just start pointing out this like, well, this part doesn't have it, and it's like 2 blocks.
The stubborn gaps.
Yeah, right, like this is a pain point, and then you can like actually point at it.
Right.
Rather than be like, well, we need all of this, well, you can't give us all, we can't give all of it.
Right.
Well, now we just need this. And then like, that's an easier ask.
Right.
And also like, you can make a big stink about like 1 block.
Yeah, chip away at it,
That's-
never
that
give up on the
could be
total vision.
strategy with
Yeah,
Archer
yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But
So
like,
Archer, north of Troop has bike lanes, and now south of Pershing, I think there's something in the works.
and Nicole was
And you
really
can, like,
open to
box
it, and
it.
she said that is a great idea, especially if there's gonna be, especially with the dispensary. I said, there's gonna be a bunch of people walking and coming around, and we want this more pedestrian friendly. There should be some bike lanes, because that's crazy. Every time I bike down there, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's insanity. And she's like, yeah, you're right. So like, the more people we can just get their heads nodding, because it makes sense.
This is a room of people that already like agree that that's what we're
Right.
doing. I think find the person that's kind of on the fence. Representative Ma and I were talking about the Chicago Tribune was featuring something in Lincoln Park, and they only quoted the skeptics and the pro automobile going, well, I don't know if this is gonna work for our neighborhood, or it's not safe, or up in the Manor Avenue Greenway going, contraflow bike lanes don't work in the city of Chicago, but then the city can point to like 15 other miles of it. So now having the visual case that can be made. I know that if you Google these words, you'll be able to find the ArcGIS story map, but if not, I'm gonna send it to Kate anyway. I know that we need to wrap up, but thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate this, and certainly I'm gonna be helping answer questions as we move forward to help keep that momentum going for any of those small things, but this has been a great chat, so thank you very much.
So thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming out and bringing the weather. If anybody, missed it, wants to see it, this has been recorded. It'll be on our Facebook Lives. Anybody can watch after the fact. And please grab some snacks on the way out the door. And before, one more thing, I do want to run over our upcoming events real quick before we get out of here, and then we will be nice to the library staff and get out of their way. That one. This one, okay. Sorry, so these are our upcoming events. So tomorrow, pretty important one, the Park District is hosting a town hall to talk about their new plans, and it's gonna be at our field house tomorrow night at 5. They are offering several iterations of this meeting, including a couple that are online, but since it's in the neighborhood, we'd like to have a good showing for this. And also let them know, for example, that we really want to connect all the parks on the river, and we would like their help to do that. So all these little things, again, chipping away at it. The public meeting on the Damon Silos demolition, that's going to be hosted by Army Corps of Engineers. That is Thursday, February 1st. Feel free to take a picture of this so you can remember all of this. We also have those events I told you about that are coming up with the 2 UIC classes for running. We're gonna have students and some of us from MPDC at Senior Bingo at the Field House in a couple of weeks. Bridgeport Art Center, 3rd Fridays, and the Lunar New Year Parade in Chinatown. We will also be having some focus groups are at Park 571, talking about the area around the Ashland Archer, the Ashland Archer intersection, including the Ashland L and the Boathouse. We're looking for just a handful of people to participate in those. So if you are interested, if you're a resident of McKinley Park, Bridgeport, or Chinatown, and you're interested in that, let us know. All right, thank you so much, everybody. We'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you. Do you need to do anything with the chair?
The chairs can stay.